Brock Lesnar versus Bron Breakker in WWE match.
It all started around 5 p.m. UK time, December 22nd, 2025, just 3 days before Christmas. And the wrestling world had no idea they were about to witness one of the most seismic moments in recent WWE history. Monday Night Raw was emanating from a sold-out arena buzzing with holiday energy, fans decked out in festive attire mixed with their favorite wrestlers' merchandise, creating a unique atmosphere that only happens during this special time of year. The show had been progressing with its usual blend of high-stakes matches and compelling storylines, but nobody in that building could have anticipated what was about to unfold. The night would go down in history not for its scheduled matches or planned segments, but for the return of a man who had been conspicuously absent from WWE television. A man whose very presence changes the entire landscape of professional wrestling. Bron Breakker had been on an absolute tear in recent months, establishing himself as one of the most dominant forces on Monday Night Raw. The second-generation superstar, carrying the legendary Steiner legacy on his broad shoulders, had been decimating everyone put in front of him with a combination of raw power, surprising agility, and an intensity that reminded longtime fans of his Uncle Scott and Father Rick during their prime. Week after week, Breakker had been cutting promos declaring himself the most dominant athlete in WWE history, claiming that no one past or present could match his combination of strength, speed, and pure violence. His confidence had grown with each victory, each successful title defense, each opponent left broken in his wake. The young powerhouse had become increasingly bold in his assertions, calling out legends by name, disrespecting the history and lineage of WWE, suggesting that the previous generation's stars would have no chance against the new breed of athlete he represented. His promos had grown more provocative, more dismissive of those who came before him, particularly the monsters and beasts who had once dominated WWE. He spoke about how modern training, modern nutrition, and modern athleticism had made wrestlers of his generation superior to those of the past. It was compelling television, watching this young lion roar with such confidence and conviction, but it was also the kind of hubris that wrestling history has taught us eventually leads to a reckoning. On this particular December night, Breakker was in the ring during the show's second hour, fresh off another dominant victory. His music was still playing as he stood in the center of the ring, championship gold around his waist, sweat glistening on his muscular frame. His chest heaving from the exertion of the match, but his eyes still burning with that manic intensity that had become his trademark. The referee had raised his hand in victory, and now Breakker was demanding a microphone, clearly ready to deliver another one of his increasingly controversial proclamations. The crowd had a mixed reaction to the young champion, appreciating his undeniable talent and exciting style while also growing weary of his constant self-aggrandizement and disrespect toward wrestling's history. A ring crew member slid a microphone into the ring, and Breakker snatched it up with his characteristic aggressive energy. He paced the ring like a caged animal, letting the crowd noise die down slightly before beginning to speak. His voice had that edge to it, that mixture of confidence and barely controlled aggression that made every promo feel like it could explode into violence at any moment. He started talking about how he had proven once again that no one on the current roster could touch him, that he had run through every challenger WWE had put in front of him, that it was time to stop pretending anyone active today posed a legitimate threat to his dominance. Then Breakker pivoted to a topic he had been increasingly fixated on in recent weeks. He started talking about the legends, the past stars who fans constantly compared him to or suggested would have beaten him in their prime. His tone dripped with disdain as he name-dropped some of the greatest monsters in WWE history. He talked about how he would have destroyed them all, how their reputations were built on wrestling in an easier era against inferior competition. The crowd began to boo more loudly now, recognizing the disrespect being shown to beloved figures from WWE's past. But Breakker wasn't finished. He was building to something, his voice rising, his movements becoming more animated. He talked about how there was one name that people kept bringing up, one comparison that annoyed him more than any other. One monster from the past that fans seemed to think would have been a challenge for him. And then he said it. He said the name that would prove to be a catastrophic mistake. He called out Brock Lesnar. Breaker's words were dripping with contempt as he spoke about the Beast incarnate. He questioned whether Brock Lesnar had ever really been as dominant as his legend suggested, whether his reputation was deserved or just the product of good booking and fighting overmatched opponents. He suggested that Lesnar had always picked his spots carefully, only showing up when the money was right, never truly testing himself the way Breaker tested himself week after week. The young champion declared that if Brock Lesnar were still around, if he had the guts to face the new generation, Breaker would expose him as an overrated relic whose time had passed. The crowd was in an uproar now, the boos nearly drowning out Breaker's words. Chants of "Brock is gonna kill you" started breaking out in pockets throughout the arena. But Breaker just smiled, feeding off the negative energy, clearly believing he had made his point and established his dominance not just over the current roster, but over WWE's entire history. He raised his championship high above his head, his music hitting once again as he prepared to leave the ring, satisfied with another successful night of destruction and provocation. But then his music cut off abruptly. The arena fell into a confused silence, that pregnant pause when something is clearly about to happen, but nobody knows quite what. Breaker's expression shifted from confident satisfaction to curiosity, then to annoyance. He looked toward the entrance ramp, clearly expecting some sort of response to his provocations, perhaps a babyface challenger coming out to defend the honor of wrestling's past. What happened next will be replayed and remembered for decades to come. The arena's lights shifted, the atmosphere changed, and then it hit. That unmistakable, bone-rattling entrance music that had been absent from WWE programming for far too long. The opening strains of Brock Lesnar's theme exploded through the sound system like a sonic boom, and the entire building lost its collective mind. The reaction was instantaneous and deafening, a combination of shock, excitement, and sheer disbelief at what they were witnessing. Brock Lesnar appeared at the top of the entrance ramp, and the sight of him sent chills through every person in that arena. The Beast incarnate looked every bit as intimidating as he ever had, his massive frame filling the entranceway, his face set in that familiar expression of controlled menace that had preceded countless acts of violence throughout his legendary career. He was dressed in his fighting gear, not a suit or casual clothes, which immediately signaled his intentions. This wasn't going to be a talking segment or a stare-down. Brock Lesnar had returned to WWE to do what he does best, hurt people. Paul Heyman stood beside him, microphone in hand, wearing his trademark smirk, clearly relishing this moment of return and the chaos that was about to ensue. But even Heyman seemed to recognize that this wasn't a night for lengthy promos or verbose proclamations. The wise man simply raised the microphone to his lips and uttered 3 words that made the crowd explode even louder. "Ladies and gentlemen, Brock Lesnar." In the ring, Bron Breaker's face had transformed from annoyance to something approaching genuine concern. You could see the calculations running through his mind, the sudden realization that his words had consequences, that calling out a legend like Brock Lesnar might have been a bridge too far. He had been so confident moments before, so assured of his superiority, but now faced with the actual physical presence of the Beast incarnate, some of that bravado seemed to evaporate. Lesnar began his walk to the ring, and everything about his body language spoke of violent intent. There was no posing for the crowd, no playing to the cameras, just that focused, predatory approach that had preceded so many brutal assaults over the years. His eyes never left Breaker, locked onto the younger wrestler with the intensity of an apex predator who had just identified his prey. Every step seemed to make the arena shake, the weight of his presence almost physical in its impact. Breaker, to his credit, didn't back down. Whether from genuine courage, foolish pride, or simply being too shocked to run, he stayed in the ring, dropping his championship belt and raising his fists in a fighting stance. The crowd appreciated this show of defiance even as they sensed the impending doom. Here was the young lion refusing to flee from the returning monster, choosing to face his fate head-on rather than retreat and live to fight another day. Brock Lesnar reached the ring and paused for just a moment at the apron, looking up at Breaker with an expression that mixed amusement with malicious intent. It was the look of someone who knows exactly what's about to happen and is savoring the moment before unleashing hell. Then, with surprising agility for a man his size, Lesnar launched himself into the ring, sliding under the bottom rope and popping up to his feet in one fluid motion. The two men stood face to face in the center of the ring, the size difference not as dramatic as some of Lesnar's past confrontations, but the aura difference absolutely palpable. Breaker was a specimen, no doubt, a testament to modern training and genetics, but Brock Lesnar represented something different, something primal and dangerous that transcended mere physical attributes. This was a man who had conquered WWE, UFC, and every other challenge put before him, a legitimate fighting machine who had proven his dominance in actual combat sports, not just professional wrestling. Breaker made the first move, which would prove to be a critical mistake. He threw a hard right hand aimed at Lesnar's jaw, a punch delivered with genuine bad intentions and all his considerable strength behind it. But Brock saw it coming, slipping the punch with the practiced ease of someone who had trained in real combat sports for years. Before Breaker could reset his stance or throw another strike, Lesnar exploded into action with a speed that seemed impossible for a man his size. The beast incarnate grabbed Breaker and, with seemingly effortless strength, hoisted him up and drove him down with a thunderous German suplex that shook the entire ring. The impact was devastating, Breaker's body folding unnaturally as he crashed onto the canvas. But Lesnar didn't release his grip. Instead, he rolled through, maintaining his waist lock, pulling Breaker back to his feet for another German suplex. The second suplex was even more violent than the first, Breaker's body spiking into the mat with sickening force. The crowd was going absolutely insane, a mixture of shock at the violence and excitement at seeing Brock Lesnar doing what he does best. Some fans were chanting Suplex City, referencing Lesnar's famous tendency to chain together multiple German suplexes, while others simply stood in stunned silence at the one-sided nature of the assault. This wasn't a competitive fight between two wrestlers. This was a veteran apex predator teaching a disrespectful young upstart a brutal lesson about the hierarchy of beasts. Lesnar still maintained his grip, pulling Breaker up for a third consecutive German suplex. By now, Breaker was clearly dazed, his body moving on autopilot with no real resistance left in him. The third suplex somehow looked even more devastating than the first two, Breaker landing awkwardly on his neck and shoulders before flopping onto his back, motionless except for the rise and fall of his chest as he gasped for air. But Brock Lesnar was far from finished. The beast incarnate released his grip finally, allowing Breaker to collapse fully onto the canvas. Lesnar stood over him, not even breathing hard, looking down at the fallen young champion with an expression of utter contempt. This was the disrespectful punk who had questioned his legacy, who had suggested he was overrated, who had claimed the current generation would destroy the legends of the past. Lesnar was making it abundantly clear just how wrong those assumptions had been. Breaker tried to crawl away, showing the survival instinct that had served him well throughout his rise in WWE. He dragged himself toward the ropes, trying to create distance, possibly hoping to roll out of the ring and escape the continued assault. But Lesnar stalked him with the patience of someone who knows their prey has nowhere to go. He grabbed Breaker by the waist again, pulling him back to the center of the ring, away from any hope of escape or outside intervention. The fourth German suplex came with even more velocity than the previous three, if that was even possible. Lesnar bridged this time, holding Breaker's shoulders down on the canvas as if going for a pin, though there was no referee to count and this clearly wasn't an official match. The bridge was a show of dominance, a demonstration that even after delivering multiple devastating suplexes, Lesnar had power and energy to spare. After holding the bridge for a long moment, making his point, he released it, letting Breaker crumple to the mat. The crowd noise was reaching deafening levels, the entire arena on its feet, witnessing something special and terrible at the same time. This was the Brock Lesnar that had been missing from WWE, the unstoppable force who made even the toughest competitors look helpless. The monster who could single-handedly change the entire direction of a company's storytelling with one appearance. Social media was already exploding with reactions, clips spreading instantly across every platform, wrestling fans around the world getting notifications about what was happening and scrambling to find live streams or turn on their televisions. But the German suplexes, as devastating as they had been, were apparently just the opening act of Lesnar's return performance. He pulled Breakker up once more, the young wrestler's legs barely supporting his weight, his eyes glazed and unfocused from the repeated impacts. Lesnar positioned him carefully, setting him up for his other signature move, the one that had ended countless matches and destroyed countless opponents over the years. The F5 came out of nowhere, Lesnar spinning with Breakker across his shoulders before driving him face-first into the canvas with catastrophic force. The move had always been devastating, but this one seemed to carry extra venom, extra intent to injure. Breakker's body bounced off the mat from the impact before settling into complete stillness, spread-eagled and clearly unconscious or very close to it. Medical personnel were already rushing to ringside, their presence adding a layer of genuine concern to the scripted violence. The EMTs and trainers looked genuinely worried, knowing that even in the scripted world of professional wrestling, the physics of large men being thrown around are very real and injuries can and do happen. They surrounded the ring, ready to intervene, but not yet daring to enter while Brock Lesnar was still in his destructive mode. Paul Heyman had made his way to ringside during the assault, staying out of the direct line of fire but close enough to observe and orchestrate. Now he slid into the ring, standing beside his client, surveying the destruction they had wrought. The wise man had that satisfied expression, the look of someone whose careful planning had come to perfect fruition. He raised his microphone, ready to put the punctuation mark on this violent statement. But before Heyman could speak, Lesnar grabbed him by the arm, stopping him. The beast incarnate shook his head slowly, the message clear, no words were necessary. The destruction spoke for itself. This wasn't a time for Heyman's verbal poetry or proclamations. This was about pure, unfiltered violence sending a message that transcended language. Heyman understood immediately, lowering the microphone with a knowing nod. Instead, Lesnar bent down and grabbed Breakker's championship belt from where it had been dropped at the beginning of the assault. He held it up high, displaying it to all four sides of the arena while Breakker lay unconscious at his feet. The imagery was powerful and clear. The old monster had returned to reclaim his spot at the top of the food chain, and the young pretender who had dared disrespect the legends had been made an example of in the most brutal fashion possible. Medical personnel finally entered the ring as Lesnar exited, carefully checking on Breakker's condition while the beast incarnate made his way up the entrance ramp. Lesnar moved slowly, deliberately, his point made, his dominance re-established. He paused at the top of the ramp, turning back to look at the carnage in the ring one final time before his music hit again and he disappeared behind the curtain with Heyman at his side. The arena was still in complete chaos, the crowd reaction a mixture of excitement at seeing Lesnar return and genuine concern for Breakker's well-being. The commentary team was working overtime, trying to process what had just happened while also conveying appropriate worry about the injuries Breakker might have sustained. Replays showed the assault from multiple angles, each German suplex looking more violent in slow motion, the F5's impact even more devastating when broken down frame by frame. In the ring, Breakker was being carefully stabilized onto a backboard, the medical team taking every precaution. His eyes were open now, a good sign, but he looked disoriented and in considerable pain. The crowd gave him a respectful applause as he was wheeled out, appreciating the punishment he had absorbed even if they had enjoyed seeing the cocky young champion get his comeuppance from a returning legend. The show had to continue, but everything that followed felt like an afterthought compared to what had just occurred. Brock Lesnar's return had completely overshadowed every other storyline, every other match, every other segment. The wrestling world was united in discussing and dissecting what they had witnessed, with immediate questions arising about what this meant for WWE going forward. Was Lesnar back full-time or just for a limited run? Was he targeting the championship Breaker held, or was this just about teaching respect to a disrespectful young star? Would Breaker recover and seek revenge, or had he learned his lesson about calling out legends? Social media analytics showed the moment-breaking records for wrestling-related engagement, trending worldwide within minutes. Casual fans who hadn't watched wrestling in years were seeing clips and getting drawn back in by the spectacle. Wrestling journalists were scrambling to get statements from WWE, from Lesnar's representatives, from anyone who could provide context or additional information about the return and what led to it. The backstage segments that followed throughout the rest of the show featured wrestlers and personnel reacting to what had happened. Some expressed shock at seeing Lesnar back,